Most of you know that last month a group of our high schoolers from Trinity traveled together to Greece. One of the very first places we visited was the Church of Saint Demetrios in Thessaloniki. Now, Demetrios had been one of the city's governors about 250 years after Jesus was born. And as governor, he was charged by the emperor with the task of killing all the Christians in the city. What the emperor didn't know was that Demetrios himself was also a Christian. And so rather than carrying out the persecution order, he took his place with the martyrs. After his death, his servant took Demetrios's blood-soaked tunic, as well as some of the soil that his blood had soaked into, and saved them. And 200 years later, when a church was built there on the site of his martyrdom, Demetrios's remains and the clothes and the soil were buried there in the church. And many people have been healed by these relics. In fact, every year around the anniversary of his death, the chest holding his remains and his tunic is opened, and the fragrance of myrrh can be smelled for blocks around. As our tour guide told us of these many miracles and healings that Demetrios and the clothes he died in continued to perform, it was clear that she expected us to scoff. So she set out to convince us that belief in the healing power of saints and their relics was not unbiblical. She pointed us to the story in 2 Kings, where the prophet Elijah has died and been buried, and then when another corpse is thrown into the tomb with the prophet's bones, the text says, as soon as that corpse touched the bones of Elisha, he came to life and stood on his feet. According to the Bible, the bones of saints and the clothing of saints can carry the power of God. And maybe that does sound superstitious to some of us. But it shouldn't. Episcopalians, after all, proclaim every week that ordinary objects, the bread and the wine of the Eucharist, can heal us. From the very beginning, Christians have understood that God delights to give us outward and visible signs of inward and spiritual grace. Water is the visible vehicle that carries the grace of God to us in baptism. The bread and wine we consume every week are the material that carries the grace of God to us in the Eucharist. And in our church, those two sacraments, baptism and Eucharist, are primary, and they're shared by basically all Christian traditions. But in the Episcopal Church, we also recognize that there are other sacramental rites, confirmation, marriage, ordination, and in these, God is especially and peculiarly present. And in each of these sacraments, there's a sign. There's a physical, material sign, the laying on of hands or oil or golden rings, that is the means by which we receive the grace of God in our lives. We believe that God consistently uses physical things like bread and wine and water and oil to convey the blessings of God's grace to us. So why not a martyr's clothes? The clothes of Jesus had power. 3 weeks ago, we read the story of the hemorrhaging woman who said to herself, "If I can but touch the hem of his robe, I will be healed." And when she touched that robe, Jesus felt the power go out of his body, and he scoured the crowd to find her. He looked her in the eyes and confirmed for her what she already knew. She was healed. "Your faith has healed you," he said. My friend Lauren, when she preached on this story 3 weeks ago, wondered if this was the moment when Jesus first got the idea for sacraments. Before this, Jesus had healed people. He had healed people with his voice. He had healed people with his touch. But here, for the first time, he saw a woman whose faith led her to believe that even his clothing could convey his power, could carry the blessing. And it worked. Maybe this was the moment when Jesus first began to think about what physical objects, bread, wine, would carry his blessing long after he was gone. In any case, the story of the hemorrhaging woman and what happened with her spread, so that what we see at the end of our text today is crowds of people begging to touch the fringe of Jesus' cloak. And when they do, they too are healed. Jesus' clothes are sacramental. They are objects that mediate his healing to his people. There's only one other time that Jesus' clothes are mentioned in the Gospel of Mark. It's at the very end of the story, when he's being nailed to the cross. The Roman soldiers cast lots to see who will get to keep Jesus' clothes. Not, it seems, because they understand them to carry healing power, just because plunder was one of the perks of the job. Maybe this tells us something about sacraments too. They mediate the grace of God to us as we approach them with faith. Their meaning and power are something given by God and are best received when we receive them with faith. Without faith, perhaps they are nothing more than bread or wine or water or a dirty tunic. The hemorrhaging woman touched the hem of Jesus' tunic, and her faith healed her. And then the crowds followed along, the gift of the sacrament growing and expanding. And 12 disciples once received bread and wine from Jesus, and now we follow along, the gift of the sacrament growing and expanding. As we approach the table today, I hope you'll take a moment and consider what you're coming with. As these crowds came to Jesus with faith, what hopes or desires are you bringing with you to the table today? What healing do you need? Where do you need the power of Jesus to come and rest on you, to change you, to heal something in your sin-sick soul? Or maybe you come to the table just needing the gift of faith to believe that God's presence is in the sacrament and is powerful for you. As you come today, come knowing that these things, bread and wine, are like the hem of Jesus' robe, carrying his grace and overflowing with power for you.